What if, once a month, every human on Earth became a killer? Not a choice, not a virus, not a myth, but a biological certainty triggered by the full moon. For 2 days, every person alive loses all sense of morality, empathy, and restraint. They don't turn into mindless zombies or raging beasts. They remain intelligent, calculated, deadly, but with only one urge: to destroy. There's no cure, no immunity, no escape. When the full moon rises, the countdown begins. This isn't a story about survival during a sudden apocalypse. It's about what happens after. When the world realizes this cycle isn't going away and begins to rebuild itself around a monthly wave of unavoidable bloodshed. Because the most terrifying part of this nightmare isn't the violence itself. It's how quickly we learn to live with it. To understand how the world adapts to something so monstrous, we need to go back to the first time it happened. It started without warning. A full moon lit up the sky. People went to sleep. And by sunrise, over 40% of the global population was dead. The next month, it happened again, then again. Scientists searched for patterns. Governments declared martial law. Religions screamed prophecy, but nothing stopped it. All across the globe, every full moon triggered the same result: mass violence, unstoppable and universal. It wasn't madness. Scans showed specific neural changes, hyperactivity in aggression centers, complete shutdown of empathy, and enhanced motor coordination. Human beings didn't become less intelligent, they became more efficient at harm. It wasn't a disease. There was no transmission, no patient zero. It was something deeper, something in us. A dormant trigger awakened by the moonlight. Some theorized it was evolutionary, a leftover mechanism from ancient times. Others believed it was environmental. A few whispered about punishment. What mattered was the pattern. Every 28th day, society collapsed for exactly 48 hours. Then, like clockwork, everyone returned to normal with no memory of what they'd done. The world had two choices: fall apart or restructure. And so, humanity chose to rebuild, creating an entire civilization designed to survive its own periodic insanity. The phenomenon wasn't gradual. It struck like a switch, flipping something buried deep inside every human mind. On the night of the first full moon, people across every continent simultaneously lost control. Neighbors turned on each other. Families tore themselves apart. Cities collapsed into chaos. In the aftermath, scientists scrambled to explain what had happened. Initial theories pointed to mass hysteria, perhaps triggered by a global event. An airborne hallucinogen, a viral brain infection, even electromagnetic interference. But none of those fit. There was no pathogen, no external substance, no traceable cause beyond one consistent factor: exposure to direct moonlight. Within weeks, brain imaging from survivors revealed a disturbing pattern. At the moment of lunar exposure, two key areas of the brain lit up: the amygdala and the hypothalamus. These are the regions responsible for aggression, survival instinct, and primal behavior. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for empathy, reasoning, and moral judgment, shut down completely. The result wasn't madness. It was pure, unfiltered instinct. The brain didn't break, it recalibrated. Humans became strategic predators, not reckless, not confused, but focused, coordinated, and lethally efficient. The compulsion to kill wasn't driven by anger or revenge. It was mechanical, inevitable. The violence lasted for exactly 48 hours, starting at moonrise and ending at moonset 2 nights later. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Survivors awoke with no memory of what they'd done. The only proof was the destruction left behind: bodies, blood, fire, and silence. Every full moon after that followed the same pattern. No country was spared, no group immune. Age, race, gender, belief, none of it mattered. Anyone exposed to the moonlight transformed. Even infants showed signs of heightened aggression. Animals somehow were unaffected. Scientists attempted everything: neural dampeners, sedatives, magnetic shielding, even total isolation from the environment. But nothing stopped the shift once the moonlight touched the skin. Artificial light didn't trigger it. Simulations failed. It had to be the real thing. Something about the actual moonlight carried the signal. Governments launched space missions to investigate the lunar surface for anomalies. Private corporations invested in atmospheric reflectors, hoping to block the light entirely. Nothing worked. The moon remained, and with it, the monthly purge. Humanity learned the truth. This wasn't a plague to cure. It was a cycle to survive. And if survival was the goal, the world would have to be rebuilt. One wall, one lock, and one sealed city at a time. Once the pattern became undeniable, the world faced a brutal equation. Every full moon meant 48 hours of mass murder. Survival wasn't about fighting back. It was about containment. The only defense was isolation. And so humanity began to redesign the very bones of its civilization. Lockdown protocols became universal. Entire cities were re-engineered, not for beauty or freedom, but for fortification. Buildings were retrofitted with automatic sealing systems. Windows that blacked out at the first lunar rise. Doors that locked with pressure systems capable of withstanding battering rams. Every home was a bunker. Every school, a vault. New constructions were more extreme. Walls became seamless, rounded to prevent climbing or grabbing. Exterior handles were eliminated. Smart materials reinforced with memory alloys were developed to withstand high-impact assaults. Ventilation systems were redesigned to operate independently during lockdowns, reducing the need to leave any part of a structure exposed. Emergency shelters were buried deep beneath the surface, accessible only by timed access hatches that sealed completely before the moon's rise. Urban design transformed. Cities introduced collapse zones, areas designed to retract or sink below the surface during the cycle. Bridges split themselves in half. Streets folded into underground vaults. Subways and transport systems became lockdown corridors rather than travel routes. Above ground, movement ceased. The world froze. AI systems became essential. Human-run security was useless. Everyone was vulnerable. So nations turned to autonomous management. Drones to patrol perimeters, robotic responders for medical emergencies, and AI-controlled networks that could trigger full city lockdowns at the first sign of lunar exposure. Surveillance was constant, not to catch criminals, but to monitor moonlight's reach. In rural areas, the solution was simpler but harsher: total abandonment. Countrysides became danger zones. Remote towns dissolved. Farmland was converted to automated operations. Entire regions were left to the wild during moon days, marked by warning signs and perimeter beacons. Lockdown drills became monthly rituals. Entire populations practiced moonfall protocols like fire drills, knowing exactly where to be, what time to seal, and how to prepare. Children learned lockdown habits before they could read. Every culture, every language developed its own word for it. But they all meant the same thing: hide. Now. This wasn't about fear. It was about inevitability. The world no longer questioned whether it would happen again. It only asked, will we be ready this time? And as the physical world adapted to survive the moon, society itself began to shift, reshaping time, labor, an economy around a ticking lunar clock. When the moon dictates life and death every month, time itself becomes currency. The global economy fractured, then reformed into a rhythmic cycle. 26 days of compressed productivity, followed by a forced 2-day standstill. Everything had to be recalibrated. Factories shortened production schedules. Work weeks were intensified. Deadlines moved to align with lunar phases. The result was a frantic, front-loaded lifestyle, entire nations surging with energy, urgency, and output in the days leading up to the moon. Retail systems adapted first. A predictable boom-bust rhythm emerged. In the days before lockdown, stores experienced moon runs, supply frenzies not unlike disaster prep. People bought food, batteries, entertainment, and whatever else they needed to outlast the isolation. Supermarkets expanded hours. Delivery systems were retooled for maximum speed. Anything ordered too late, lost to the cycle. Technology filled the gap. Automation took over jobs deemed too risky for human workers. Warehouses ran on drone fleets. Agriculture was fully robotic, overseen by AI systems immune to moonlight. Essential services like power and water were rerouted through sealed remote hubs. Anything that required human labor had to happen before the cycle hit. Then came the concept of moon pay. Governments and corporations began offering lunar hazard compensation, additional pay to incentivize productivity in a condensed schedule. Overtime became the norm. Mental health suffered. People didn't rest. They prepared. Social life changed just as drastically. Events, weddings, and holidays were squeezed into safe days. Some couples even timed pregnancies to avoid due dates falling during the cycle. Friendships were measured by proximity to one another's shelters. No one trusted last-minute visits. Entire dating apps emerged around lockdown compatibility, who you could trust to be sealed in with you. Leisure was repackaged. Entertainment industries adapted by creating moon content, streaming media, immersive VR experiences, and interactive lockdown dramas designed to occupy the mind and keep the population calm during isolation. With nowhere to go and no one to see, distraction became a survival tool. Education restructured. Schools operated on lunar calendars. Children were taught to balance intense bursts of learning with short, mandatory isolation windows. Lessons were designed around resilience, contingency planning, and emotional regulation during moon days. Every classroom had a lockdown simulation chamber. Drills weren't optional. Currency itself changed. Cycle credits became a global norm, measuring economic activity within each 28-day period. Bonuses were granted for completing quotas early. Penalties came for missing lunar deadlines. Everything was scored, everything counted. And yet, despite the intensity, society didn't collapse. It stabilized on a rhythm dictated not by hours or seasons, but by one unrelenting force in the sky. But even as humanity rebuilt its world and timed its life to avoid the bloodshed, one question remained unanswered. Who is responsible for what happens when the moon rises? At first, the legal response was chaos. Courts were flooded with cases: mass murder, arson, assault. But there was no logic in prosecution. People weren't conscious of their actions. No intent, no motive, just a blank universal compulsion. By the third moon cycle, laws began to shift, not to punish the violent, but to manage the aftermath. A new legal doctrine emerged: cycle exemption. Anything committed during the 48-hour moon phase was considered unattributable. A person could not be held responsible for what occurred during that time. No trials, no imprisonment, no guilt, just documentation. The result, a society without justice, at least once a month. But even if the law refused to assign blame, emotions didn't follow the same rules. People remembered who they'd lost: family, friends, entire communities wiped out. Forgiveness didn't come easily, even when it wasn't anyone's fault. Survivors of attacks began using terms like moon shame, lunar grief, and blood ties to describe the emotional wreckage. Psychological trauma reached unprecedented levels. The dread of each upcoming cycle became a national obsession. Sleep patterns altered. Productivity dipped in the final days before lockdown. People cried without knowing why. Some developed mirror phobia, unable to look at themselves in the days after a cycle. Others simply detached, emotionally hollowed out by monthly waves of fear and guilt. Support networks became essential. Lunar therapy centers opened across the globe, offering grief counseling, emotional reintegration, and identity recovery sessions. Families of victims met with survivors to find closure, though closure was rare. In many cases, the killer had no memory, and the victim's family had no outlet for rage. Then came the orphans. Children who survived family-wide killings, locked in bathrooms, hidden by brave siblings, shielded by parents in their final moments, emerged from cycles traumatized, alone, and often never the same. Governments launched lunar orphan initiatives to shelter them, educate them, and help them adapt. But some of these children grew up with no belief in human goodness, only in survival. Ethics began to erode. People asked hard questions. If we can't be blamed, why should we feel bad? If someone always kills during the cycle, should we preemptively isolate them more strictly? Is protecting yourself just self-defense, or a kind of preemptive punishment? A darker philosophy took root among some. The moon shows who we really are. That beneath civilization and manners, violence was always waiting. And now, once a month, it was given permission to surface. Religions fractured. Some claimed the moon's violence was divine punishment. Others insisted it was humanity's own darkness reflected back from the heavens. New cults formed around lunar worship, embracing the cycle as sacred, necessary, even purifying. Their rituals became more elaborate with each passing month. What began as a biological anomaly had become something much more dangerous. A mirror held up to humanity's soul, showing a reflection few could live with. And not everyone accepted this new order. As lockdowns grew stricter and society embraced control, others chose chaos, stepping willingly into the moonlight. As the world wrapped itself in concrete and countdowns, not everyone complied. While most of humanity sealed itself in steel boxes and prayed for the moon to pass, a few chose a different path to face it. They called themselves moonwalkers, individuals who refused lockdown. Some believed they could resist the compulsion, that the transformation was psychosomatic or exaggerated by fear. Others were driven by ideology, convinced the cycle was a government conspiracy designed to strip freedoms and enforce obedience. They staged protests, hacked public alert systems, and held moon vigils, where entire groups would stand outside during the full moon to prove the violence wasn't real. It never worked. Not once. Surveillance footage from these vigils was disturbing. Smiling faces before sundown, then chaos, screaming, and silence by morning. Even those who tried chaining themselves or drugging their bodies lost control. Some footage was suppressed. Other clips leaked online, fueling both horror and fascination. Still, the resistance grew. For some, it was about martyrdom. Others believed the violence could be mastered. One fringe theory claimed that repeated exposure without shielding could lead to immunity, that survivors of open-air cycles might eventually adapt. These moon evolvers, as they called themselves, became test subjects in their own uncontrolled experiment. The death toll among them was staggering. Then came the fracture zones, entire regions that rejected lockdown altogether. Failed states, isolated settlements, cult enclaves. Some operated without formal government, relying on fortified compounds, lunar worship rituals, or purification duels to determine who survived. These zones were unpredictable. Sometimes they were wiped out entirely. Other times, survivors emerged, hardened, altered, and frighteningly composed. Conspiracy theories flourished in the gaps. Some blamed the phenomenon on satellites, psychological manipulation, or extraterrestrial intervention. A popular belief claimed the moon itself was a weapon. A biofrequency emitter designed to suppress humanity through ritualized violence. Fringe groups accused world governments of harvesting data during cycles, or secretly studying survivors to build the perfect soldier. No one could prove anything, but the doubt alone was enough to destabilize trust. As lockdown culture became the law, freedom became rebellion. And in some places, rebellion meant stepping into the moonlight on purpose. Black market industries emerged to serve this underground. Custom helmets with fake shielding, illegally modified memory blockers, anti-lockdown tech that promised to override smart architecture and keep doors from sealing. Most of it didn't work. Some of it made things worse. What was once a survival system now became a point of division. One side clung to control, the other to chaos. And between them stood the moon, indifferent, untouchable, absolute. But beyond survival and resistance, the most profound change was cultural. Because when death comes every month, even art, identity, and human meaning begin to bend. A civilization can survive horror. What's harder is surviving normalization. As the lunar cycle became routine, so too did its influence on culture. Human identity began to orbit the moon, not just in fear, but in ritual, in symbolism, in belief. Life was no longer linear, it was lunar. Every person, every community, every calendar spun around a silent, glowing timer in the sky. Languages evolved. Words emerged for emotions that hadn't existed before. Terms for pre-moon anxiety, post-moon guilt. The bond between people who survived cycles together, and the quiet relief when a loved one locked in nearby didn't break through the wall. In some places, traditional greetings changed. Instead of goodbye, people said, safe cycle. New holidays formed, not to celebrate, but to remember. The Day of Silence honored victims of the first moon. Cycle Eve was observed by lighting candles in sealed windows, a symbolic act of resistance against the violence outside. Some communities held moonlight memorials the night before lockdowns, projecting names of past victims into the sky using laser displays. Birthdays falling within moon cycles became both feared and revered. Children born during the cycle were called lunars and were often thought to carry special traits, emotional resilience, heightened intuition, or in darker corners of society, cursed blood. In some cities, birth registration was manipulated to avoid a cycle time stomp altogether. Education revolved around preparation. Children learned moon ethics alongside reading and math. They were taught not just how to survive the cycle, but how to understand it emotionally and socially. School projects included lockdown architecture designs, cycle survival narratives, and reenactments of first-generation resistance. History classes didn't teach wars by nation or ideology. They divided time into pre, cycle, and post-trigger. Art became introspective and circular. Music often followed a 28-beat structure. Films were released in synchronized waves, safe, day comedies, post-cycle dramas. Horror films banned during certain phases of the month to avoid emotional destabilization. Painters and sculptors increasingly worked with enclosed, contained forms, sealed shapes, curved surfaces, moon motifs etched into every medium. Religions splintered. New sects emerged worshiping the moon not as a god, but as a mirror, reflecting back the truth of human nature. Other groups developed complete lunar liturgies, reciting cycle prayers, wearing silver ritual garb, fasting before the full moon. A few underground philosophies embraced the violence as sacred, claiming that the monthly purge was humanity's only honest moment. Even fashion shifted. Clothing lines included moonwear, outfits embedded with emergency seals, quick-access blackout panels, and built-in oxygen support in case of accidental exposure. Some people wore jewelry indicating their lockdown grouping, coded to signal trustworthiness in an emergency. Digital identity transformed as well. Social media platforms adopted lunar filters, allowing users to display cycle-based mood logs. Status updates included cycle check-ins, where users shared their emotional readiness for the coming phase. Live streams surged before every lockdown as people connected one final time before sealing away. In time, people stopped questioning why the moon did what it did. They accepted it the same way ancient people accepted storms and fire, an element to be respected, feared, and ritualized. And slowly, quietly, a truth settled into humanity's bones. The moon didn't just change the night, it changed everything. But beneath the rituals and rhythms, a deeper question lingers. What does it mean to be human, when humanity itself is interrupted every month? The world didn't end when the moon turned violent. It evolved. Architecture changed. Laws changed. Culture, faith, and time itself bent around a force no one could control. Humanity, faced with a monthly apocalypse, didn't go extinct. It adapted. But at what cost? We survived by surrendering. Surrendering spontaneity. Surrendering trust. Surrendering the illusion that we were ever fully in control of ourselves. 2 days a month, everyone becomes something else. Something colder, more efficient, less human. And for the other 26 days, we pretend we aren't haunted by that. We seal our homes. We reinforce our cities. We watch the calendar like it's a weapon. And we live in cycles, not of nature, but of fear. The most terrifying part, we've normalized it. Parents raise children who've never known a world without lockdowns. Kids grow up learning how to brace for the moon before they learn how to write their names. Romance, business, faith, everything shrinks into windows between bloodshed. And yet, the systems keep running. Humanity persists. But survival is not the same as healing. There's no closure when the threat keeps returning. No peace when the enemy lives inside you. The moon has become more than a celestial body. It's a deadline, a god, a judge. A reminder that beneath all progress, all civility, something darker still pulses. So we ask the question, what happens to a species that must forgive itself every single month? And more importantly, how long until the moon demands something more? If this world made you think, if it unsettled you, even just a little, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who still believes humanity is in control. New worlds, every week, until the next full moon.